now. It's kind of, I don't want to wait too long, you know?
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
fine. I'm ready to go when you are.
welcome everybody to the Office of Student Engagement Summer Resource Workshop. This one is on the Disability Support Services, and presenting for you guys will be Caroline Corbrand. So please enjoy, and if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, but we will have a Q&A session at the end.
Okay. And then Olivia, you'll let people in the waiting room as it goes on? Okay, perfect. I like see this little message in there. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Corbrand. I'm the Director for Disability Support Services. I am primarily at our South Orange campus. However, I do oversee our other campuses. So I occasionally will go to our IHS campus. I used to run services there. So for any of your students, if they might be in any of our 3 and 3 or our nursing program for health sciences, if they're going to be going over to IHS at some point in their undergraduate career or graduate career, I am very well versed with those programs as well, and I oversee my staff member who's there full time, as well as our law school students. So with our law school, we provide remote accommodations because we don't have a physical office there at this time. So some of our students I know will go on to law school, so we're still the same office that would work with them. So we are located on the South Orange campus. We are in Duffy Hall. If everyone's not familiar with Duffy Hall, it is where the bookstore is. So we're pretty easy to find. We're essentially right upstairs from the bookstore. We're across from Housing and Residential Life, and we're next door to Parking and ID Services. So a lot of students are in and out of this building for various different things. So we're easy to find. I put my email address on here. Gianna Graw is our assistant director here. So she's the other person on this campus who will meet with students, as is myself. So her email's on here. And then I gave you our general email, dss@shu.edu. This is a great email, for students to have. So if they're ever not sure who to email, they can always just email something to dss@shu.edu. That is maintained by our wonderful testing coordinator, office guru, Diane DiLorenzo, and she will forward me things. She'll get, she responds obviously to things, but if it's something that Gianna or myself should handle, she's always going to forward it to me. And then this is our phone number. So if you're here, I'm assuming it's probably because you have one of your students has accommodation needs, who has a disability, but I like to just give a little bit of information here. So we work with students with permanent as well as temporary disabilities. So disability is any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life functions. And that is everything from, taking care of yourself, seeing, hearing, walking, sleeping, concentrating, all of those things count. We do see a fair number of students each year who get injured. So, your student might be already getting connected with us because they have, maybe they have a learning disability or they have depression or whatnot. But if they ever get a concussion or they ever break an arm or a leg or something like that, these things do happen. I wish we could bubble wrap our students and that would never happen, but it does. Let them know to let us know. We're not going to get a phone call from anyone other than usually the student or parents to say, hey, my student, fell and has a concussion or they hurt their wrist. So sometimes they might be permanently registered with us, but have a temporary need that we should be aware of to work with them for some short-term accommodations. Or, this is another way that we provide services for students. Sometimes, a student does not have any sort of reason to register with us, but they could get injured. So it's good just for parents to know that we're here to support, even if it's just a short term. We might not do something for a short-term illness like mono. Usually students don't necessarily need something. If they feel like they need something, they should of course reach out. But things like a broken limb, they might not be able to physically write an exam. So we have some things that we can do for them. So just keep this in mind. How do we set up and determine accommodation? So the first step, which hopefully many of your students have already done, but if not, this is how it happens, is to make contact with the office. So give us a call, shoot us an email. We maintain a very healthy incoming list. So if if your student contacts us and says, I'm Susie Smith and I want to register with the office, we're going to put them on our incoming list. So that way we can follow up with them. We try to follow up with students a few times just so that they don't forget about us. And so we kind of manage this list throughout the year. We'll do outreach to say, hey, here's what you need to do. And then we do periodic outreach to students. We do see a very large number of students each year. So this past year, I think our incoming list got as many as like 400 pending intakes. So it's not as simple as, I can't email them all each month to say, hey, we still haven't heard from you. But we do work to do a couple different outreaches before we just keep them pending, and then ball is in their court to contact us. So we're happy to meet with them whenever. But our list of interested students has gotten quite larger than what we have normally seen in the last few years. So there's 3 main steps. There's a self-identification form. It is very brief. It maybe takes students about 5-10 minutes. I encourage parents not to fill this out for their children. A lot of times that is what we see. And typically I can tell because of the way it's written, it usually is using pronouns and things, and it's not written in the first person, because you're doing it for them. So I do recommend let them fill it out. Do it with them, like sit with them, help them start this process. Because once they're here, the ownership of accommodations moves to them. So the earlier we can help make that switch, the better. Parents are welcome to contact me, but what you'll start to notice is if you email me and ask me for certain accommodations and things, I'm going to loop your student in on those communications, because now they need to be responsible for communicating with us and getting things set up for themselves, and I don't want to delay that or make it more difficult for them when they get here and that scaffolding isn't there anymore. So welcome to email me, but please don't be offended if I then also add your student to the email and say, dear mom and your child, because we want to make sure that we get them in the loop and start making this very natural that they can reach out to us. So they would submit documentation as well. If you have questions about the documentation, we do have our documentation guidelines on our website. They are something that I will be updating, just FYI. They were written by a previous director, so I will have some updates for them during the summertime. But we really, we're pretty flexible when it comes to documentation. So what we want to encourage is that you submit what the student has. So if a student, I think the documentation guidelines from the previous director might say something like, a 504 plan or an IEP is not enough. That is not accurate. We accept 504 plans and IEPs all the time. I am been working in this field now 11 or 12 years. It's been a while. And additionally, I'm a parent of a child who has accommodations. And I know that it's like blood, sweat, and tears to get an IEP in many school districts, as well as 504s. I'm pretty routinely getting emailed by people who in my town sort of have come to know what I do professionally. And so I just got an email earlier from a parent who's like, help, I need help getting an IEP for my son, what do I do? And so I help parents all the time to do that and to identify the needs. So IEPs and 504s are okay. That's fine. If there's testing, obviously, I think the more we have, the better equipped we are to support your student. It also makes it a lot easier to have everything in one place and to have everything in the place of where the student is going to school now. So I think one thing that sometimes people forget is that once you leave the school district, it might be more difficult to get things like paperwork from the district. So if there's evaluations that they've done up to now, the IEPs, any sort of documentation and evaluations and things, I would make sure to make a request to get all of that from the district so that you can give that to us and we can make it part of their file here, because then we hold everything. We keep things for 7 years for students. So if a student then is going to graduate school and needing something, we have it for them. They're not sort of hunting it down or going to a place that maybe doesn't, they have a different records retention or whatnot. Sometimes people don't think it's as important to see the long-term history, but some of the testing agencies, like the MCAT for medical school, is extremely difficult. I have had students who come in with like a file this big of documentation, and the MCAT will still say that they want to see them be reevaluated within a certain number of months of taking the MCAT. But the more of the history that they can show, the more likely they are to receive accommodations. So that's just my plug for, now's the time to kind of request anything that the school has on your child, and a lot easier to do that now. And then we do an intake meeting. So we do roughly 45 to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour meeting with your student. If they want you to participate, that's completely fine with us. We have no problem with that. We encourage parents to participate if that's okay with your student. We will talk about accommodations they've used before, accommodations they think they need now. I will go through their documentation and ask them things. So sometimes there's things that might be on an IEP that a student might not have been using the last few years. I don't like to rely on just like, hey, tell me what accommodations you've used. I like to go through each of the steps within the IEP, and that's how I've trained Gianna to do it as well. And it's just important to kind of go through it, have a discussion, talk about what accommodations are like in college versus high school. There are things that are considered modifications in high school that would not be provided in college, but we're going to talk that through with you. We're going to talk it through with your student of, well, let's talk about why you were using particular things. And if it feels like it's still a need, we'll talk through and see if there's another way to meet that need. If it's what can be considered a modification. So modification would be sometimes students might, an IEP might say they need to master, 80% of, the content on an exam. We wouldn't here change what the exams are. They would take the same exam as everyone in their class, and they would be graded accordingly. There would be no adjustment of grades according to having an accommodation. Or if sometimes I see students might say that they could retake exams. So maybe in high school, they were able to retake an exam that they had not passed. That's not something we can provide here. Or shorter assignments. So maybe there's a 10-page paper, and in high school, maybe they wrote, 80% of it. Maybe they would write an 8-page paper. We can't lessen the requirements. So those are just a couple suggestions of things that pop up that I like people to know about. And then it's essentially an interactive process. So we are going to determine accommodations with your student, and we're going to work to potentially remove barriers. So I don't like even the playing field. I think that's something that people talk about a lot in accommodation world. It's something that's a catchphrase, and it's something that I certainly, when I first started in this field, I think I used a lot more than I use now. I really believe our job is to help remove barriers for students, to help them to be successful as possible, because I can't even the playing field. I can't give somebody more hours in a day. I can't, somebody who has dyslexia and it takes them, triple the amount of time to read their schoolwork. I can't lessen that load for them as much as I want to. We can talk about creative ways to accommodate them, such as alternative formats of books and things of that nature. We can talk about streamlining the work. And I'm always happy to powwow and do things like that. But I can't give them 3 times as much time to do their work because it's a trickle down effect. So even if they had, 3 times as long to do a paper, they're going to have other work that's just piling up. So I really work to remove and reduce barriers for students. And those sometimes look very different in college as well. We routinely have students that come to us and they may only be asking for extended time. And then we'll talk through some other things and they're like, oh yeah, yeah, that would be helpful. So I'm always somebody that's going to suggest things to students if I think it would be useful. And that's why we want to have a meeting. I want to understand where their strengths are and where their challenges are. And it's not a one and done. So we can set up an accommodation plan this summer, and hopefully it will be everything that your student needs. However, we very routinely meet with students because all of a sudden they're having some more difficulties with different types of assignments or work that they didn't necessarily have in high school. You know, the work in college, it's not as like memorizing. It's not just, okay, your professor, your teacher put down a set of notes on the board and you copy it down and then you study it and you know, basically throw it back up on a test and that's, you know, you get good grades. That's not exactly how college works. You know, there's a lot more differentiation of figuring out like what types of notes am I supposed to put down. You might see PowerPoints that have like minimal notes. And so we want to actually help students to become the strongest students they can be. And sometimes that means we need to get really creative and working with them to help them learn some of these skills and to think through, you know, how they do their work, because it's typically a little bit different. And I think our students are really do a really great job here, but I think there are times where a student has not had as many challenges and then it kind of pops up a little bit more here. And I think they struggle with that a little bit. Like, well, why is this so much harder? And I think it's just that it's approached differently. You know, there's sometimes more lead time between their classes. There's a lot of just different things that come up. And there's differences in teaching approaches too, where I think in the K to 12 system, there's a little bit more consistency in how things are handled. Okay, so what happens after the intake meeting? So each semester, our students are going to request a letter. This is like the biggest thing. And it's helpful for you all to know, because you could always prompt them a little like, oh, hey, did you get your letters for your faculty this semester? This is something we send students so many reminders of. A student really has to ignore our emails to forget about this. And the majority of these emails will come from dss@shu.edu. But every semester they need to just request a letter. And mainly it's one, because the faculty want to see a new date on a letter. They don't want to see one that was written a couple years ago. And two, to use our system to actually request. So say they have extended time and they want to take an exam with us, they need an active request in our system to be able to use it. And so we send lots of reminders about their letters. And then a lot of times throughout the semester, we'll send reminders to say, oh, hey, do you have exams? Schedule exams with us. So a prompt that you can always give them is, oh, hey, did you get your letters for faculty yet? Because a lot of times students are like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. So we will send them the letter and then they can share it with their professors, and we talk them through this at intake. We will share a very detailed email after their intake that reminds them, like, here are what the steps are that you're going to need to do next. And like I said, we'll send reminders periodically as well. And then one of the biggest things for students that I want you to know, and I want students to know, we really took a different approach this past year with starting to do self-advocacy training from intake. So at intakes, I'm really talking very openly with students about what an issue might look like that's related to their plan and how we can work together to fix that. So there are, we always have new faculty. We always have adjunct faculty. So we do faculty training, but it's an ongoing, never done process. Like, I will never for the life of me be able to say, like, I trained the faculty, we're good, right? It's going to always be an ongoing process. And so what that means is people are going to come to the table with different understandings of accommodations, and they may get the letter from a student and then they may say something that doesn't jive with that. So I had an intake today and was talking through with a student how to use extensions and the best way to use them and how we can help them. And this is one that I find faculty sometimes will have like an unwritten policy against, if you will. So they may say to students, like in their policy, it might even say like no extensions or no late work accepted. Okay. But a student comes to them and says, here's my accommodations. And one of those accommodations is maybe an occasional extension. The professor may say to them, well, I don't do extensions. Your student does not need to get in a back and forth with the professor to say, but I need it, or like I have it, because that's not their role. What their role is to identify that they have accommodations, which they'll do through the letter we give them. And then their role is to request it in a timely manner. So if right from the get-go a professor is saying something like that, it is like par for the course, let us know, because we can already get out in front of it right there and start working with the faculty member. Sometimes students will delay telling us these things because they're like, well, I didn't want to get them in trouble, or I didn't want to like have them not like me. But frankly, what usually happens is I reach out, I'll just say, hey, I wanted to find out a little bit more about your class. And I don't even need to go into details, because a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I don't do extensions. They like put it right out there on the table, and then we can have an open discussion about, well, that's not actually how accommodations work. Let's talk through this. Okay. So then it will pave the way for them to ask for something they need down the road much, much more easily. However, if they don't do that, it's okay. If they need it at some point, just because the policy on the syllabus says they don't allow it, if they have it as an accommodation, that doesn't mean the professor gets to say that. So they should still ask for it. And if the professor said no, they're going to want to let us know. Again, they don't have to convince their professor, but they do need to let us know, because faculty very rarely make that phone call to say, I told so-and-so that they can't have X. So just please do remind them, if they're having trouble, to let me know, let us know what's going on, and we will work with them. I'm a straight shooter. If there's a reason that we would support the professor's decision, maybe there's a learning objective that would be lost by providing a particular accommodation, I'm going to talk very openly with your student about why that is, and we will see if there's any alternative as well. Okay, so some big differences between high school and college. So the responsibility is going to lie with the student, not the parents or the school. So under IDEA, it's the school's responsibility to find students that need accommodations. That ends when a student graduates high school, or when they age out, if they have a disability that would allow them to continue school past 18. It would be when they age out of that. So just so you know, the student has to request the accommodations, and they should do that proactively. Modifications are rarely made. We want to make sure that the accommodations are helping them to do the same work as their classmates, and that it wouldn't fundamentally alter any course materials, requirements, degree requirements. Due to FERPA, we might not be able to discuss certain things with you. Sometimes parents will ask to be the point of contact. They'll say, can you contact me about X, Y, and Z, or can you send me the reminders? No, we cannot do that. We do have to communicate directly with your student. I'm happy to be in contact with you. Like, if you reach out to me, you have a question, reach out to me. But I can't add you to the communications or all communications with your student. And we also want to empower them. We want them to start to learn how to do this. And it just takes some practice. We can't do retroactive accommodations. And then in college, the focus is on access, not success. Now, that's legally where it lies. That is not my approach. I want to do everything we can do to help our students to be successful. Where we have to look at the barriers is there a barrier related to your disability that's preventing you from having access? But we are always trying to do supportive things and to help our students to be successful. Self-advocating at college. So, this part, as opposed to like asking lots of questions, I think most of the people on this call have probably already, their students have made their decision, which is great. But if they haven't, or you have other children that might be going to college, it's okay to ask a lot of questions before deciding on a school. I welcome people to contact us while they're figuring things out. You want to start registering with an office early. So we are already starting. We've done a little bit of intake meetings. A lot of our students are still finishing up high school, and so a lot of them aren't free until like 3 or 4 o'clock. So it's hard to fit a lot of them in until we hit like real summer. So we are also switching over our accommodation systems right now. So we've had a much busier June than we would normally have. So come July, we are hitting the ground running. So we have been already scheduling some students for July. Students are welcome to reach out to us, but if they have submitted their self-ID form and documentation, we will be reaching out in July to schedule meetings. I started doing some Teams meetings with students back when I was at our IHS campus. During the summertime, because we had medical school students at that time, we had students that were coming into programs where they might be back-to-back classes all day long, starting in September. So I found that Teams was a really great opportunity to allow students to have a face-to-face meeting while doing it, on the computer or remotely from wherever they might be in the country. And so, through the pandemic, this became something that everyone's using. So we continue to do that. Students are welcome to come in and have meetings if you're local, but we don't have to have that as a barrier. We can do meetings this summer over the computer. And so it allows us to really open up a lot of meeting times that will work for students. So, one of this was something I used for another presentation. So if you had used a college consultant, something I always tell parents and whatnot is just have your student involved too. So you guys are probably a little bit past that. For self-advocating, something that it might feel silly, but it's actually really, really productive is role play how to ask for accommodations. So I think one of the biggest switches for students is that they're coming from a place where in high school, their teachers were privy to having their 504 plan, their IEP plan. If they had just like maybe if they were in private school and they just had an accommodation letter or whatnot, that might have been shared with their teachers for them. That's not going to happen here in college and doesn't happen in colleges. So that is like one of the biggest shifts is students have to recognize that they have to now say, dear Professor Smith, I have extended time on my exams and here's my letter. And so students need to be aware of that and start thinking about that. And it's a really easy process. The majority of those conversations go extremely well. And if they don't, we're here to help support them. So, that might be something you could do this summer is say, hey, let's talk about, what are you going to do when you start classes? You need to let your professors know you have accommodations. Are you comfortable doing that? Like, let's practice here. And they may like roll their eyes at you and whatnot, but it does make things a little bit easier. And we try to help them through that when we do their intakes too. One thing that always stands out to me that I like to share with students and with parents, I ran a transition year program at another school, and I would have upper class peer mentors work with our students. It's something I'm hoping I can find some funding and bring here at some point. But the peer mentors were really great. They would just share, tidbits with the students. They might take them out to coffee. And one of them I would ask, I'd say, okay, well, what did you wish you had known when you were starting out, when you were a first year in school? And one student had shared with the group, she said, I used to walk around with my letter in my backpack like it was, going to catch on fire if I handed it out, like someone was going to have a problem with it, and so I would just leave it in there and just kind of like dread that conversation. And she's like, every time I'd say, okay, well, I have midterms in 2 weeks, like I have to give it to them now. She's like, every time I would give my professor the letter, they'd be like, okay, great, no problem. And she's like, I just wish I hadn't made it so much more difficult on myself and I hadn't sort of worked myself up over it, because every time it was not a big deal. So it's something I like to parlay over. Some common pitfalls that we see. So we're seeing a ton of students right now, which is great. We're getting a lot of, I think because we're actively moving our files over to a new system, I actually got us down to like 0 new self-ID forms. And then I can tell like every day I'm like, wait, there's 10 more in there. Like I just cleaned that up and there's 10 more. So we are seeing a lot more students making contact now, which is awesome. But not everybody always follows through. So a student might give us their self-ID form and then not do the documentation or not do the meeting. So it's really important that we close that whole loop, right? And we have the students do the meeting. And like I said, if you can help them to do that this summer and encourage that while they're home, that's great too. Because what'll happen is we have a lot of students registered now. We'll see a bunch of students in the beginning of September, and then we'll see a little bit of a lull until midterms. And then students either try to register right before midterms, which sometimes doesn't give enough time to put the accommodation in place, or right after midterms. Maybe midterms don't go so well. A student will say, oh, I really kind of wanted to like leave that accommodation stuff in high school. But you know, there's no harm in putting it in place. But there can be a harm in not putting it in place. We can't go back and do makeup exams and such. So the earlier they register, the better. Other things we see, just not sharing accommodation letters until right before an exam or assignment is due. That usually backfires. Being afraid to use their accommodations. Sharing too much information with faculty. So this is one that I do find it happens more when students don't register with us than when they do. So I've had students who'll register with me as a senior in second semester senior. And they're like, oh, they always have a sigh of relief. It's like, oh, I wish I had come and registered before, because I'll tell them, I'll say, you know, you're going to give them this letter and it's going to tell them that you're registered with our office, and it's going to tell them you're entitled to X, Y, and Z. It's not going to tell them why you're registered with the office. That is up to you if you want to share any information with them about that, but you're not required to do so. The vast majority of our students will just say to faculty, you know, hi, Professor Smith, I'm registered with DSS and these are my accommodations. And that's all they're required to share with a faculty member. But oftentimes when students are requesting accommodations, but they haven't gone through us, we see this with a lot of students who might have a psychological reason for registering. Maybe they're experiencing depression or anxiety or something else. They may share a lot of information with faculty to justify their request for accommodations that they never would have needed to or felt the need to do if they were registered here and had a letter to provide. And then also just trying to get the under the radar accommodations rather than going through the office. Some faculty are going to be like, sure, no problem, but they are definitely going to encounter faculty who are going to be like, no, sorry, like that's not in a letter, I'm not going to do that. And sometimes that will you know, it feels like a denial from a professor, but that's not what it's meant to do. You know, faculty really should follow the process that they provide the accommodations that are on the letter. And so they're just trying to do what they should be doing and letting us vet that there is an accommodation need there. So I try to encourage faculty not to just do just because a student said I need extra time in an exam, to not just give it, to let them go through our office. And if a student is struggling with documentation or something of that nature, to talk to us, and you know, we'll work with them and see what we need to do. How can you support your student during this transition? Again, so if you were somebody that used a college consultant, you know, we want students to be asking questions, making calls. If they haven't done that yet, I think the time to do it is now. Help model it for them. You know, let them send the emails. You know, sort of step back and say, you know, have you reached out to the office yet? No. Okay. Why don't you write that email? And if you want me to look at it before you send it, I'll do that for you. But like put the onus on them to send it. And so then that way they start figuring this out with the scaffolding and help of you right now at home with them. Please, you know, review their plans with them. If they've had accommodation plans before, it's okay for you to go over the documentation with them. Talk to them about their areas of strength and areas for growth. We all have them. I often tell students, you have to read the evaluation with a grain of salt. It was written to qualify you for accommodations. So sometimes it might say things it's written, a lot of these are written with a deficit model of, what is wrong as opposed to boosting up strengths. I wish they weren't written in that way, but they do tend to be written in that way. So I find that if you go through it with them now, you can really explain things. You can give them things like, this was something you really struggled with, but we've seen a lot of growth with you here, or that does still seem to be an area, maybe expressing yourself in writing is more challenging for you, but you're really great at math. They're gonna hear these things, and it's good for them. I have had parents in the past. I had a parent once at one of the schools I worked with who like found me in the cafeteria and was like, "Oh, you're so and so, right?" And I was like, "Yes." And they're like, here's the documentation. Please don't show it to my child." And I said, like, I can't do that. I'm not gonna like force them to sit down and read it. Um, but it's their records and it's part of their record here. So they have access to it. So I was like, if there's something that you're concerned about them worrying, you're concerned about what their reaction to it might be, now might be the time to really go through it with them and talk it through, as opposed to later on. And I know it's not easy, and I know I think about these things already with my son, of how to, help boost him up while also helping him get the support that he's entitled to. You want to encourage them to self-advocate, to identify issues to the office. If they tell you something and it doesn't sound right, a professor said I couldn't have extra time on a quiz. Tell them, please call the office, please stop by, tell them what's going on. Those things do happen. And oftentimes they happen from a place of somebody not knowing. I had a professor who I happened to be meeting with about something, and they mentioned to me that they did an exit like quiz. It was a way that they could actually do attendance in, I think they had like a pretty large section of a class. And so they would do these exit quizzes. So he's like, they're really like a 2.5 minute quiz. And I said, well, or 5 minutes quiz, something along those lines. And I said, so he's like, so I can't do extra time on it. I was like, well, let's talk about that. Why can't you do extra time on it? He's like, well, they're all in there and then they're waiting to leave, and I was like, no, you could make it universal design. If you really mean that it's 2.5 minutes, then just give everybody 5 minutes. Or if it's really like a 5 minute quiz, give everybody 10 minutes. And then you've built in universal design because you're giving more time than you think anybody needs on it, because it's really meant to answer it. It's like 5 multiple choice questions. And they were like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And so obviously we were able to work it out, and now they have it. But we can't work those things out if we don't know about them. So please, please encourage them to let us know. And then just recognize that anyone working in this field can make mistakes too. So we want to help your students. So, reach out to us early. Let us know if something's going on. Sometimes there are things that evolve. I am somebody who, when I first started, there were things that were done in the field that aren't done anymore. So back in the day when I first started, I remember a student had asked for accommodations in a lab. And my supervisor, who had been working in the field a lot longer than me, had said, oh, well, we can't do lab accommodations because, the lab is set for a certain amount of time. When the lab is over, it's over. And I was like, all right, well, that's not true. Like, I have set up tons of lab accommodations over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of nuance, a little bit of pushing, a little bit of conversation with faculty. I have literally been gloved up in our cadaver lab at IHS, helping students like with technology in that lab when they needed it, due to some different types of disabilities. So, we really try to help students in any way we can, or we can help run an extra time version of an exam if need be. But we need to know what's going on. So if a professor were to say that, I don't think they will say that here. That one hasn't come up since I've been here, but if they were to say that to your child, please just let them know. Just say, you know what, that doesn't sound right to me. Like, it's on your letter, you got extra time, talk to the office. Okay. Questions. I wanted to leave like a little bit of time if there's questions in the chat, or people want to, I don't know, Olivia, if people can unmute themselves. I'm not sure how it's set up.
Yeah, you're all welcome to yourself. You can also type in the chat.
And I know I geared this towards parents too, just because I think that's what we anticipated, more parents. So if there's students on here who want to ask questions too, like that's great. I'm glad you're here. Yes, parents can come to the intake meeting. Not a problem at all. For accommodations for our documentation guidelines, I'm gonna pull. If anyone hasn't seen our website, if you go to the Seton Hall website and you like Google it and just write in DSS, you can find our website pretty easily. But in here, I'm going to give you the link in our chat to our documentation guidelines. If you have a 504, I think that's a great starting place. You could just provide the 504. A lot of times we'll have doctors, they could write a letter on their letterhead stating what the diagnosis is, what the impact is, what recommendations they're making for accommodations. But a lot of times a 504 is going to give us a good bit of that. There are some forms too in our on our website. I don't love the forms mainly because I feel like doctors have chicken scratch for handwriting, and they don't write very clearly. The other day I had to reach out to a student because I couldn't even read the doctor's name. I couldn't read their phone number to even ask them to clarify words that were essentially like we could not make out the meaning of it, and so we couldn't really understand the documentation. So they can write a letter, they can, type a letter if they can't write clearly. But the forms are okay. It's just sometimes I find that they give us like 2-word answers on the forms. So the forms could be a jumping off point if they want to just use those for that, what types of questions we have. But we have, some flexibility in what we can accept. Are there other questions? And people can feel free to reach out if they don't want to put them in the chat here or ask them on here in this format.
Well, if there are no more questions,
Okay.
ooh, I keep hearing myself. Sorry. If there are no more questions, I think we'll close it out here. Please make sure orientation is coming up, so please make sure you're aware of what date you're registered for, and keep an eye on your email because there will be more of these resource workshops happening during the summer. And of course, you can always email either DSS if you have a disability question or engagement@shu.edu if you have a general Seton Hall question.
Cool. Well, thank you. I hope everybody has a nice night.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye. Thank you, Olivia, for your help.